We're going to go over our pick'ems for Americas and Pacific. We're going to determine the teams that make it into playoffs and the teams that unfortunately go home a little bit too early than they thought. And so we're going to jump straight into it. Crew bounces off their momentum, especially against their win against Sentinels, and be able to carry that momentum against MIBR, where we finally get the matchup of Aspas versus Les and Sadak, which would be a banger and probably the match of the week. I would be super excited because we finally get to be able to see it, especially with Sadak and Les joining EMEA last year. And so that would be probably the match of the week and something to look forward to. And it looks like an eyesore, and it's the second matchup. You probably noticed it off the bat, and you're saying, wow, M80 versus MV? And personally, I think M80 is really good. Don't deny the fact, but I think this could be the one-off game where M80 have the favorite. As a tier 2 team, they are the favorite against MV, and M80 has shown a tier gap in tier 2 where they are the clear dominant favorite in their league. And as they jump into tier 1, they may get caught up in nerves or just be caught off by MV, where they can throw a curveball and be able to either start to pick up the momentum of their last couple of games within the stage where they've shown improvement, where they've shown, okay, we have more of an identity and more a sense of direction of how this team is going to play, and be able to put our players on the strong suit with Demon 1, Rossi, Glyph, Knights, and Kesnet, especially if they're all hitting. I think they can take a lot of people by surprise. And so I think this is one of the curveballs where I'm going to throw in. And keep in mind, this isn't the end for M80. And so I'm going to pick MV in this situation, and oddly enough, I think I messed up on this one, so I'm actually going for 2G. And so believe it or not, 2G is back, and yes, they are a pretty good team. They have familiar faces like Genum and QCK that are on the team, and they have a really good amount of experience. And so against a Fury team that's on the back foot against the wall and has shown some internal issues, I think G2 have the tier gap in terms of togetherness and be able to have their identity solidified and pretty much being the underdog as a tier 2 team. They're formerly as an OR disqualified from even be able to be in Ascension because they had such a lackluster year. And so this is their proving time, especially with a bunch of players that are underdogs. I feel like C9 has shown really great signs. I feel like they are able to capitalize on Oxy's momentum and be able to win against a tier 2 in this team. Show the reasonable gap between a tier 1 and a tier 2 team. I mean, especially if Oxy's frying the way he is and has been, I mean, there's no team that could stop him as long as the core of this team doesn't, bomb out. There's a scenario where Oxy can drop 30, maybe even 40, and potentially lose the series. And so I think it is about Oxy as the spearhead, but a lot of what results in the series win against, especially against a win against 100 Thieves, the team that 100 Thieves only lost to was C9. And so being able to use that confidence into the play-ins allows them to springboard and be able to carry that momentum and be a dark horse in this play-ins. And so C9 against the EG, where EG has shown really great signs. I think they have definitely improved, especially compared to where they were early in the year. Until this very stage, they got their first win. And in that first win against MV, I feel like they had a really good trajectory, or at least a really good ceiling. But as we know, they have a couple rookies, and they don't really have established core that spent thousands of hours together. But in this case, where C9 have Oxy as their winning condition and has been popping off recently, and if he continues the front, I think that carries them against EG that isn't necessarily struggling, but I think is capable of being able to be middle of the pack. I think against the Energy, they show some really great signs again, but Energy just had some pedigree that can be bought. One thing to note about 2G is an underdog team. They know they are underdogs, and so they will talk trash, especially if they're on the game. If they're on and they're shooting, I think that they're highly capable of being able to be competitive. But G2 show against them that. And a lot of other teams that talk smack is like, okay, there's a tier gap. They show that they, again, are one of the dominant teams in Americas. And so this play-in is their springboard for them to be able to show, oh, you thought 100 Thieves, you thought Energy, you thought Lev were a top team. We're, again, capable of being able to be a top 2 team in Americas. And you can say G2 putting on a dominant 2-0 against 2G, most people wouldn't bat an eye. If Envy are able to capitalize off their momentum against their upset loss against M80, I think they're highly capable of doing it against a shaky Sen. Sen have shown really high highs. They've been on a similar path as a lot of these teams in these plans where they start off really well, or they started off having a series of games where they have really good momentum. But in Sentinel's case, they just haven't been able to close it out. Envy has shown capable signs of being able to be a middle of the pack team. I think once they all put it together, and especially against the Sentinels that doesn't really have enough time to be able to fix out the little details and is capable of still making the same mistakes against their crew game, I think that Envy is the underdog and is the dark horse in this play-ins. And so a lot of people will be surprised with this pick. And so MIVR versus crew, I think we finally get the matchup that we all been deserving, Aspas versus Les and Sadak. And so in this case, I think, well, to make it up real quick, I think MIBR are a playoff caliber team. I think they've just shown a little bit of inconsistencies. There's MIBR are starting to get their identity in shape. Aspas is starting to be a lot more aggressive. Second has always been on a heater. I mean, who's going to be able to stop that guy if he continues to fry? EG has shown potential. I think they're capable of being a tier 2 team. In this case, I think EG are the favorites. And then M80 versus 2G, I think this would be a really good tier 2 game. I think both teams are tier 1 capable. I think M80 just outlasts them based on their experience and their coaching staff. And then Furia versus Sentinels, I think Sentinels, without a doubt, this is their springboard game to be able to say, okay, hey, maybe we lose against MV or maybe we lose against M80, but we can bounce back and be able to make a run towards playoffs, because that's what they need. They need to be able to make playoffs, to be able to make champs. So then Crew and Sen, they get their rematch. And for this time, Sentinels get their third time's a try. They end up winning against a Crew. They realized their mistakes against Crew because, believe it or not, Sen made a whole bunch of mistakes. They were at any point on their Breeze, they were not being aggressive. Like, they were so passive, and it's the one thing I hate, especially on Breeze, is teams on defense that don't team fight and play aggressive either on the first timing or just in general. They're being isolated so many times, and I feel like they're so scared of the op. So Sen, realizing their mistakes, are blessed with the opportunity to be like, okay, that happened on the regular season, that happened in the group stage, and so in the play-ins we can take advantage of it, we can learn from it and carry on. And so the M80 versus EG, I think M80 show a gap of where they're capable of being a tier 1 team. Again, they are a tier 2 team, but I think they're probably better than 50% of what VCT Americas has to offer. So then that leaves the qualified. I think MV versus MIBR. I think in this case, again, MV is the supreme underdog, and I don't see them beating MIBR. And if I'm being honest, I was pretty down on MIBR. I think since they started to reiterate on their form and start to not do the same thing multiple times until it finally works, and start to iterate on their style and their changes and not leave Tex in a 4v1, I think they are a playoff caliber team, and they show that regardless of who the opponent is. I think one of C9's biggest ops is G2, and in this case, G2 qualify along with the MIBR in the upper bracket. And then in the lower bracket, we have MV versus M80. They get their rematch. M80 is one of the teams where they've been dominant in tier 2, and since they have a familiarity, since they get a familiarity of the opponent, especially getting a rematch against MV, I think that sets up the stage for M80 being in playoffs and potentially facing off against a familiar face. And so M80 against the rematch, I think I pick M80. And then C9 versus Sentinels, be able to qualify, win or lose, win or go home. I think Sen be able to qualify with M80 and potential matchup in playoffs. I think that would set the stage where the stakes are the ultimate highest. Either it's win or go home in the lower bracket, or somehow in some other scenario where they meet. I think that would set the stakes and be the ultimate cinema moment. And so while in this bracket they don't meet, this does set the stage for them to be able to see them a little bit later on. Now in Pacific, I'm gonna give KRX the benefit of the doubt. Even though they've been one of the worst teams in Pacific in this stage, I think that they're able to show a gap between tier 2 and tier 1. I think I'm pretty optimistic on onside, and I would normally pick them in this scenario, but I think I'm giving a lot of these tier 1 teams a lot of benefit of the doubt. And so while that did happen in EMEA, where a couple of tier 2 teams have beaten tier 1 teams like Fnatic, I think KRX showed the standard of a tier 1 team at the very least. Especially with Hyunmin. I mean, hashtag save Hyunmin. Like, jeez. I mean, he was frying on both maps when they played T1, but they still couldn't get nobody was helping Hyunmin. So hashtag save Hyunmin. RQ versus Sharper. I think RQ showed some really great form. I think they are highly capable of going back to their last year form where they were able to make internationals, and they finally have defined their roles where Jemkin is a secondary duelist. He's no longer playing Neo. Don't get Jemkin on the Neo. I mean, even Manya has been frying on the smokes. And so now they established the roles and they no longer have Cushy on the team. I feel like that sets the stage for RQ knowing themselves and being one of the teams that can benefit from, okay, we know ourselves. And now that we know ourselves, we are more capable to be able to handle the unknown. Whereas a lot of other teams, they get in chaotic situations and they do a lot of mistakes that they wouldn't otherwise do. And the next game, Full Sense versus QT Dig. I think Full Sense desperately needs this game. If Full Sense even make it out of the lower bracket, I think this game will be highlighted as a major concern. A tier 2 team against a Full Sense that's been struggling, but a Full Sense has been one of the top 3 Pacific teams at one point. And maybe due to some coaching staff changes that may have happened, there's going to be a lot of heat if they lose this game. And so I'm going to go for Full Sense in this scenario, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes the other way. And the next game, Team Secret versus Zipto, I think if any of these matchups where I have to pick a tier 2 team, I think this is the scenario where it's most likely to happen. I think Team Secret has a roster where they've had, some really good aimers, some really good, really good highlights in certain points, but I think it isn't enough time to be able to be capable to be a good to middle of the pack team. The only way KRX loses, the only way Zeta lose this game if Hyunmin just completely takes over. And that is kind of unlikely considering he's been playing the Phoenix. Like, Phoenix can fry, but has the Phoenix really won a map, or has the Phoenix really carried a series? Like, we've had Martin and EMEA that has been a really good Phoenix, but I mean, him himself can't really carry, you know, Denso mates. They ended up being eliminated and no longer playing this season. And so in this scenario where KRX do win against a tier 2 team, I think that Zeta have shown a lot more better potential. And then DFM versus RQ, I think DFM is one of those playoffs teams. I think unfortunately they did lose to KRX when they were using the triple duelist for the first time ever. So it makes sense, they're caught off guard. But unfortunately to DFM, they are a playoff team. They just were unlucky that PaperX didn't handle business and beat Vero. I mean, props to Vero. I think Vero is a spectacular team, and I am a fan of Vero. But if DFM don't get surprised by KRX and PaperX, you know, win their game against Vero, then they're clearly a playoff team. DFM have shown they are a playoff team, and this is the game where they show. T1 has started to widen the gap as being one of the top tier teams. Like, there's middle of the pack, and then there's T1 and PaperX. PaperX and T1 are kind of like buddy-buddy, where T1, yes, Stacks just joined in, but, you know, T1 are probably talking to themselves like, yeah, we're actually like pretty good. We're frying KRX. Like, KRX, you know, maybe they get a map. I mean, they got a map against Vero, but sheesh, man. T1 did not give KRX any mercy. And in a series, and in a stage where T1, yes, has lost to Vero, but has beaten a PaperX that maybe was, you know, not taking it as seriously or as intense as they would normally be, I think T1 shows against a decent, you know, maybe even a full sense in their greatest form, you know, Vietnam full sense. I don't think they're capable. I don't think they're capable of handling a T1. The Nongshim versus Zipto, I think Nongshim, I think Nongshim showed the gap between tier 1 and tier 2. Masters winner Nongshim doesn't lose to a tier 1 team. There's no way. I think Nongshim started to be able to understand their identity. They picked up the Yoru, and they're starting to develop and understand themselves. You know, since Francis is an IGL and he's no longer playing Yoru, they start to develop and reiterate on their game plans. And, you know, they don't have to be tempo all the time. They can, you know, be really contacty, especially with the Yoru, and they start to develop their playbook and be one of the top teams again. Onside versus Zipto, I think Onside have a favorable matchup. You know, if I were to quickly draw this, I would have full sense win, and then I would have Onside. And then as we go through this, you will start to notice a little thing for Onside. And then QT versus RQ, I think RQ is one of the teams that is playoff potential, especially given their showing against Nongshim. RQ finally get their get back and finally start to show that they can be a top contender team, a top 4 team, which would be really great. KRX versus Team Secret, I think that's nothing to be too detailed on. RQ versus KRX. Unless KRX makes the champs run in the lower bracket, I think RQ are clearly starting to line up as the better team. I think they are the better team on paper, but when it comes down to the matchup, I think they can start to bridge the gap between them and the middle of the pack. Zeta versus DFM, I think this is one of the games where it's going to be super high impact, where it's Japanese Zord versus Japanese Zord. At least one of them makes it to playoffs, and I think it's DFM. DFM, again, have been really improvement. I think one thing for sure when I see DFM is that everybody is playing not only together, but everybody is shooting. Like, it's not just the May show. Like, in each different map, there's always been a top performer, and it hasn't always been the same person. I mean, Yatsuka was frying on some of the maps that I was seeing. I mean, I was like, and one of the weak points has been Cess, and Cess has started to pick up towards the later end of the stage. And so DFM against Zeta, it would be really close, but I think DFM come out of it. T1 versus Nongshim, I think T1 is the better team, but I think Nongshim, in my agenda, should be able to make it back to international. And even if they qualify to champs points, which is most likely the scenario, I think they're able to beat a T1 as they start to ramp up to be able to make it and be competitive in champs. Now, if you remember, this is a trend you notice. Even if Onside lose to KRX, I think they have an extremely favorable lower bracket where they don't face anybody that's a huge juggernaut unless they play a DFM that loses to Zeta. I think in this sense, again, I'm not really high on full sense. I think there is potential. They have the potential to be able to come back, but the fact that they have to come back makes it extremely unlikely that they can do it in the first place. While I have been a little bit high on Zeta, I think Onside is the tier 2 team that makes it out of playoffs. And then T1 versus RQ, I think RQ beat T1, even though T1 is favored to win this matchup. I think RQ figured out their roles and is able to be competitive against the T1. I mean, if Jemkin fries, he can easily have them win the series, like especially when Magnet frying. I mean, Zan been really good on the Neon, really looking really good on the Neon. I think it's really highly potential for T1 to win, but I think I'm gonna go with RQ. I think this is a 60-40. I think this is a 55-45, where T1 is the 55 and RQ is the 45. And I'm willing to say that RQ beats T1 in this scenario. And so that's our qualified teams. That's been the pick'em. Let me know if you would change anything, or let me know any hot takes about this. I know a lot of these changes, I know a lot of these picks would be the other way around, you know, maybe like a T1 RQ. So let me know what you think. Also subscribe. I do VCT watch parties, and I also do VCT breakdowns content. I just made a video on Sen and breaking down why they've been struggling, at least towards the later end of the stage, and why Sen could be in jeopardy to not even make playoffs. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.